magic is not magical thinking. And I think a lot of New Age and a lot of spirituality is very based around this magical thinking, spiritual bypassing. Right. No, the magic that I'm espousing in my book is magic is dangerous because it's real. You're literally hacking reality the same way that you can hack a program with code.
Hey everyone, welcome to Josette's Soul Salon, where we have conversations that answer the question, what does it take to live a soul-expressed life? I'm your host, Josette LeBlanc, and during this episode, I speak with Chaweon Koo to learn more about magic and how it's relevant in the modern world. Magic and the occult are enjoying a renaissance in pop culture, but is the way they're depicted accurate? As a culture, do we understand what magic is and what it isn't? And how does something that can seem archaic fit in the world today? Chaweon Koo is a writer of the intersection of pop culture, the occult, and futurism. Her Tik Tok, @Chaweon Koo, is one of the most popular occult accounts on the platform, and she also interviews some of the most distinguished occultists and witches in the English-speaking world on her YouTube, Witches in Wine. In the past year, she has helped co-facilitate crypto rituals, which are public magic rituals done directly on the Ethereum blockchain. Her new book, Spellbound, A New Witch's Guide to Crafting the Future, available as a hardcover, has over 60 beautiful illustrations specifically commissioned for the book and details her journey from an atheist witch into one of the most visible East Asian practitioners of both Eastern and Western occult traditions. In this conversation with Chaweon, we dive deeply into the history of the occult, Western and Eastern alchemy, chaos magic, magic and technology, and the future of magic. You'll want to listen to the end to hear Chaweon speak about the intersection of magic and technology and what living a soul-expressed life means to an atheist occultist. To connect with Chaweon, check the links in the show notes. And if you enjoy what you hear, make sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. Now let's get into the salon. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today with Chaweon Koo. We're going to be talking about the occult, witchcraft, demystifying everything. And she's the perfect person to do that today because she has just released a new book, Spellbound, A New Witch's Guide to Crafting the Future. So there's a lot in there. Witchery, I don't know, witchcraft, is witchery, can I use that term? Is that a term?
Witchcraft is the actual craft.
Okay.
And the art of doing witchcraft. Witchery is probably like what people say when they're talking about what witchery is this, just general, what sort of magic is this?
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause I'm going to be learning a lot here today. I'm going to be very curious. I'm very curious about this topic. I've read some things about it so we're entering this as newbies on in this conversation. Yeah. So first question, how do you define the term occult? Because that, I think, is a term that is misrepresented, and I would like to stop that. So I'd love to know what's your definition of occult?
That is a great question. And I appreciate that as being the first question because the word occult comes from the Latin occultus, which literally means hidden. It means secret. Mm-hmm. And so technically, occult can mean anything that is, like a secret society, secret methods of doing things. But when we in the West think about the occult, we have a very specific image thanks to Hollywood. So I didn't know this until like a couple of months ago. But when Hollywood, or before Hollywood even, when movies were becoming a thing, so the silent movies, what's a great sort of silent movie to make? Well, you want something that's visually kind of exciting, right? Because there was no sound, there was no talking. Right. So the early filmmakers, they chose basically like scenes from Kabbalah, like mystical Judaism, conjuring up demons or things like that. So it wasn't exactly historically correct, but it sort of comes from the mind of people making films that, it was a sort of like an anti-Semitic thing as well. To be like, oh, this is what it all looks like, the occult, dangerous, anti-Christian, evil. And also, of course, when we think about the occult, we're thinking about the unsavory side of magic. People doing hexes, working with Lucifer, Satan. And people often use the term black magic. I will discourage people from using the word black magic because, and this is something that I also recently learned, but it actually has some really racist connotations to it.
Okay.
It's been used to describe the magic. And it actually came to be in America, puritanical America, when they were talking about the spiritual practices of the slaves. So instead of using the word black magic, which is racist, we can use the word baneful magic. We can say hexing as things that we do.
Right.
So yeah, magic is a constantly evolving thing. The occult always had this image because it seemed anti-Christianity, but it's actually something to me that is incredibly constructive and nowhere near the sort of destructive and I would say evil connotations that we have in Western society.
Yeah, it's super interesting that you bring in pop culture and that it goes that far because since I've been studying astrology and so on for the last year, I've, more aware of symbols, of the astrological symbols and alchemical symbols, right? And when you start watching TV, when you have this new knowledge, TV or show or pop or movies, you can see how those symbols are just thrown in everywhere to symbolize evil, right? I guess, and that was where it began. So
Exactly. And it was just imprinted in the imagination that the occult looks like this. And so today, when we think about movies like A Dark Song or Hereditary, great movies, and they bring in some occult content. And I think a lot of people who are a little bit more educated, when they speak about the occult, maybe they're not talking so much about the evil stuff,
right,
but about things that are coming from especially what we consider grimoire traditions, which is texts that were written, it's varying degrees, but oftentimes based on Jewish mystical traditions, Kabbalah. And so these were magic things that were being done by people who came from that tradition, or, there was even John Dee, who was like a court physician for Queen Elizabeth I, who was doing like Enochian magic. That's also considered to be the occult. And just basically texts that were hidden and oftentimes practiced by, I would say, like well-educated men. It seems as though witchcraft was sort of the purview of the midwife, the woman in the village, women in general, versus occultists and occult magic was oftentimes sanctioned by the rulers, like I mentioned, like Dr. John Dee was a court physician.
Okay.
And alchemists oftentimes who are working under these rulers, they were sort of tasked with making sure that the magic was on point to protect the ruler, that they were trying to figure out like how to create whatever it was, elixir of immortality, whatever it was. So the occult, when we really think about how we use it in modern, just as modern shorthand, we can safely say that if we're talking about grimoires, if we're talking about book traditions that were used by oftentimes educated people who are writing in Latin, if we're talking about magic that was ceremonial being like very ritualized and has like a strong tinge, I would say, of Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity. I think it's safe to say that when we talk about Western occultism, that's usually what we're talking about.
Okay. That's the true side, like the magical side, the side where the magic is, and not side. I mean, I shouldn't say side, but it's the essence of it is the occult, the texts and the practices are used to elevate and to accentuate what's happening in our lives. I mean, am I wrong there? Because so let's say what you were saying about the people working with the queen, the elixirs and trying to bring more to the life of the person. Am I on the right track there?
Sure. I mean, magic, whether you're doing witchcraft, whether you're doing grimoire magic, whether you're doing an indigenous practice, whatever it is, all sorts of magic. Usually, when you really dig into it, all these traditions, they say, well, you can hex somebody or you can heal them. So it really there's an amorality to magic that a lot of people don't want to admit.
Okay.
And occultism, I would say, also has the group of people, when we talk about things like working with the 72 demons or the 72 angels, of the name, that's occultism.
Okay.
That's grimoire magic. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, I would never work with the demons. I would only work with angels. And that is coming from this idea of like, they just want to be constructive. And I would say angels can be destructive as well. So grimoire magic, occultism, it can be very healing. It can be as, love and light as New Age, like the most love and light New Age thing can be. But it can also be as dark and as, I would say, edgelordy and just intense as what Hollywood, or even deeper than that. So it can be either way.
Okay, fascinating. I guess it's like everything in life has this hierarchy of, let's say, goodness or badness or whatever we want to say. There's the polarities, right? So it's the same thing. Okay. Thank you for highlighting that. It's wonderful. And I love the way you're saying for grimoire magic, occultism. So there's a just so much within, for example, what you've written here, Spellbound, there's so much history in terms of how we can experience this. And you said that you were talking a little bit about Western occultism, but I know that your book also refers to Korean or Eastern occultism also. Is that part of it, your book?
Sure. I mean, again, the word occult, it just really means just in general, like secret stuff. But I think most people in the East, there is no, at least in Korea, there's no really good equivalent to the English word witch.
Okay.
Like in Korea, people know mudang, they know about the shamans, the Korean shamans. But the concept of witch, that's like in East Asian culture, the idea of witch is just automatically somebody who does hexing.
Okay.
So, but Eastern indigenous traditions, and shamanism, Muism is a indigenous tradition. It's an indigenous spirituality that was there in Korea before Buddhism even came in.
Right.
So when we talk about Eastern spirituality, Eastern occultism, or anything like that, depending on how you see it, again, most Koreans would not consider Muism to be an occult thing. But for me, just to kind of bring in sort of like a nice counterbalance, I'm saying it is in a way a type of occult practice. Same thing with African traditional religions and practices. So they're indigenous practices, and you have to be initiated both in Muism, ATRs, African traditional religions. This isn't something that you can just look up on the internet. This isn't something that, much like being a Catholic priest, you can't just decide, I'm going to set up shop and I'm going to do like high mass. You have to first become the priest.
Right. So
this is the way that a lot of indigenous practices are. Versus, I think, occultism is an open practice. It's not closed. It's open. So when you have an open practice, it attracts lots of different people, lots of different paths in between, like whatever it is. But I would say the main thing about the Eastern traditions that I'm trying to bring in is not so much this idea of, spooky occultism, whether it's Western or Eastern. It's more like trying to make the parallel. Like in my book, I talk about how if you go to Coex in Seoul, there's that Pogunsa. Pogunsa, sort of like, it's a huge like Buddha, and it's like a temple. It's one of the oldest temples in Seoul.
Okay, yeah.
And it looks across, like the temple is literally staring across at, Coex Mall and the convention center, the largest underground mall. This is like skyscrapers. This is Samsungdong. So in Korea and in many places in East Asia, these things, they exist, modernity and tradition, they exist very comfortably. And it's me positing that just like modernity and tradition can coexist comfortably, perhaps East and West can also coexist. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why I'm talking about those traditions and calling them occult.
Okay. Because of the openness and the way they come together. Okay.
Maybe not the openness, but more in terms of, because Muism and indigenous Korean spirituality is a closed tradition.
Yes.
But it would be more of, there was this really rich, and of course, Buddhism, depending on which lineage and stuff you're looking at, it's open or closed. So it's more saying that it isn't just occultism in the West. There's occultist practices in the East. There's magical practices in the East. And perhaps there isn't an exact, just like the equivalent of witch in the East as there is in the West, but we can still build them together and say that, oh, but the thing is that it's not completely different worlds. There's a way to meld it together. Because this book is about chaos magic, and chaos magic is a relatively new, I would say, subgenre of occultism, which is basically saying we're going to take technology, we're going to take magic, we're going to bring science in, and we're going to do lots of spells, and we're going to see if tradition actually matters or if it is something that we just want to hold on to simply because, or does it actually work? So chaos magic is a little bit more like a DIY, and it became really popular in the 1970s. And it kind of had its heyday, I would say, between like 1970s to like, I don't know, like the early 2000s, but now it's making a comeback because of Gen Z. So in the occult, it's not like, oh, we're just doing like grimoires and stuff that are from, the 17th century. We're also talking about chaos magic. We're talking about witch talk. We're talking about the constant evolution of the occult. And just like the East is constantly evolving, North America is not the center of the world. Just like I feel like Asia has sort of overtaken North America as like the cultural and business center of the world. It's also saying that as Asia has evolved, so has magic. As North America has sort of had its thing, East Asia also has its thing.
Yeah, I love that. So it's like we're aware of the tradition, we're aware of where it's coming from, but we're like, that's just a testing ground. Like, does this still work? Is it possible? Like, does it?
That's chaos magic.
Yeah. So could you give an example of, I don't know. I kind of want to ask you, could you give an example of chaos magic? Like what would be some things that you would test? I don't know if that's possible or,
well,
I've studied a little bit, but yeah.
So this is the quintessential sort of example given for chaos magic. You're doing finance magic. Okay. So if you were doing a very traditional path, like let's say you were Wiccan, Alexandrian, Gardnerian Wiccan, you've been initiated into it. Not everybody can do that sort of Wicca. There's Wicca traditions, lineages where it's more open, but there's also closed ones where you have to like be initiated. You have to go through almost like a training process and what have you. Mm-hmm. So if you were to do financial magic and you're a Wiccan, or you work with Hecate, like a goddess, or you're Christian, or whatever else it is, you have sort of a set way of doing things. It's like your pantheon of gods or God, singular.
Right.
It's your own sort of like just the philosophy behind your tradition. Chaos magic is more like, well, I'm going to take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I like this, I like that. And I really like that, like, let's say the ancient Greeks, they called upon Zeus, or, the Romans called upon Jupiter for money magic. But you know what? I feel like I connect more with Scrooge McDuck, because Scrooge McDuck is rich.
Right.
So I'm going to use pop culture because chaos magic is borrowing a little bit here, a little bit there, whatever, and using technology. And so this would be sort of like this is just an example people give of chaos magic. Now, does it work? Does, calling upon Scrooge McDuck, is that the best way to do financial magic? I don't know. Everybody's different. But I do think it's telling that many of the prominent chaos magicians of the 70s, 80s, 90s, they've moved away from chaos magic in terms of like the hardcore, like first wave of it. But that it's interesting now that chaos magic, which is very eclectic, and again, it has this like strong sense of like scientific method, like, let's just try Scrooge McDuck. Let's see if it works. Oh, it doesn't? Okay, let's try something else. Mm-hmm. Let's just see, like, it's very results oriented. So to see it now becoming a thing with Gen Z, so it's coming back again. But in the interim, there's been this period of time where people who used to be really into chaos magic became really enamored with traditional ways of working, especially with the dark goddesses. There was a huge renaissance of working with dark goddesses like Lilith and Hecate, and also like going into like your ancestral roots, like people who have Irish background, maybe they were like looking into like their Celtic roots and, like Druidism or whatever, I don't really know much about those traditions.
Okay.
So, and then people just being like, oh, let's just do ancestral veneration, maybe not even working with the gods, but the spirits of our ancestors. And people then were like, I want to get initiated into an ATR, African traditional religion, or I want to be initiated as a Mudang, Korean indigenous shamanism. So all that was going on in the interim. And so now with the conflicts of that and just, TikTok and social media, just bringing stuff in. So for me, even though there's a lot of tradition that I talk about in my book, simply because it has a lot to do with technology and has a lot to do with how I see witchcraft evolving in the next 5, 10, 20 years. That's why I call it, actually, I never called it chaos magic. Other people called it chaos magic. So I'm just like, okay, it is chaos magic.
Okay. So can you say more about the technology that you bring in? Is it more like, because there's the means, so TikTok, like there's the actual tech, but there's also the sociological implications of the technology. So it's super interesting when I hear you talk about, how witchcraft is evolving in the future through technology. Is it the actual tech, like taking this piece of technology and putting it into action, or is it just the venue for communication about witchcraft and in the occult?
Yeah, so that is one of the hypotheses that I lay out in my book, is the redefining of what it means to be a technology and what it means to be natural versus artificial. Because I think that the pagan movement that was, became really big starting from the 1960s and also is really big right now is the romanticized view of nature. Nature never was clean and pristine, at least not in my lifetime. And I've lived in Bali before, so I know beautiful nature. But, I've told Rachel, our friend, Alien Heart, this. Yeah. And I was like floating in the Indian Ocean and I just saw packs of cigarettes, like litter floating by me in the Indian Ocean. That's just the way it is. But the thing is that people, they treat nature like nature has to be pristine in order to be worthy of love and in order to be worthy of being seen as just simply just worthy in general. And I told Rachel, this is the way that we see a woman's body. If she has gone through trauma, if she is no longer a virgin, she's no longer of value, So the way that we romanticize nature, the idea of I'm going to dance naked under the moonlight. Okay. But there's going to be electrical lights, like, in the background, there's light pollution, there's, insects and, just basically just realizing that the image that we have of nature is fiction in a lot of ways. So when we try to say that technology is lower than, like a lot of people in the pagan community, they talk about technology like, if you do iPhone stuff or if you're like dealing with computers or artificial intelligence, that's inferior because that's not as natural as, going into nature. And I'm just like, well, it's not natural for human beings. We weren't born wearing shoes. Shoes are a technology. Right. Paper is a technology. Ink is a technology. Animals also use technology. Beavers, they build dams. Dolphins, primates, bees, they're all creating something that they were not naturally born with, but they're utilizing and they're trying to leverage their skill set in order to survive in this world. So to me, technology is the most natural thing in the world because all animals either do it or, are trying to do it because that's just a natural way of like trying to augment your life. And human beings are so successful because we've been able to take technology and leverage it so many times, like exponentially more successfully than all the other animals. That's why we dominate. But all animals do it. We all do it. And so the fact that we're trying to, as people who are in the pagan community, are trying to talk about nature in a way that never existed, only virgin nature, and instead of loving nature exactly how she is right now, polluted, traumatized, strip mined, smog, fog, bees are dying, all that stuff. And if you're not going and, covered in asphalt, covered in skyscrapers, that's nature right now. Of course, there's other parts of nature, but that's a part of nature too. And the fact that we would reject any part of nature, the same way that, we claim to love women, but we reject and slut shame and do whatever else to women as well. So for me, I'm just like, no, fuck that noise. Magic is not about rejecting nature, because nature is where we are exactly right now. We're not on the moon. We're not on Mars. We're on planet Earth. We are creating things like plastics from materials from planet Earth. Did we mine it off an asteroid? No. This is purely terrestrial stuff that we're doing on a planet that we're on, that we were born on, that our ancestors have, at least as far as I know, that have been on as Homo sapiens for at least a couple 100,000 years. So to me, I'm just like, for any magic people to over romanticize nature is, to me, it makes zero logical sense, and it's purely based upon fantasy. And to me, magic is not magical thinking. Like when psychologists talk about magical thinking, it's a pejorative. It's, oh, you're just having magical thinking right now. You're like a child, thinking, oh, everything's going to be okay if I just close my eyes and ignore. Magic is not magical thinking. And I think a lot of new age and a lot of spirituality is very based around this magical thinking, spiritual bypassing. Right. No, the magic that I'm espousing in my book is magic is dangerous because it's real. You're literally hacking reality the same way that you can hack a program with code. It's the same thing. And you can reverse engineer things in magic the same way that you can reverse engineer anything else. And magic also goes with first principles. When we talk about engineering and first principles in engineering, a great engineer, let's say somebody who's like gone to MIT and they've learned about building bridges, they can build a bridge in Antarctica. They can build a bridge in the Amazon rainforest. They can build a bridge anywhere because they learn the first principles about what creates a good bridge. Mm-hmm. So it's the medium is not as important as the first principles and the underlying fundamentals of what it is. And I'm saying that's exactly what magic is. Magic is real. It's dangerous. There's first principles. You can reverse engineer it. And we don't have to live in a fantasy world, because if we accept that it's real and that it is dangerous, then we can actually, in a very constructive way, decide that we are agents of our own destiny.
Wow, that's powerful. Powerful. Real dangerous first principles. Is this how you've outlined your book? Because just outing myself, have not read it. So because it's when I imagine that, it really helps me put things in perspective of what you're saying. So it's really beautiful. Real dangerous first principles. There's something else that you said that I'm missing it. I know. I don't. Anyway, we'll listen to it later.
Well, actually, the way that I've organized the book is first through the 5, they're called elements, but they're actually phases of Chinese alchemy, which is called wujing. And Korean and Koreans call it oheng. It's 5 phases. Okay. So it's, when we go to a traditional Chinese, like a hanyak doctor, they're telling us, oh, you have too much wood in your system, or you have too much metal, or whatever it is. It's the fundamental, the alchemical fundamentals of Eastern or Chinese alchemy. So it's like wood, fire, earth, metal, water. Okay. So each thing, unlike Western alchemy, which, if you look at a tarot card and you look at the magician card, you can see, like in the traditional Rider-Waite deck, that the magician has the 4 elements like on the table. The 4 elements in Western, we all know this, right? It's like earth, air, water, fire.
Yeah.
The Chinese in East Asia, it's not elements. They're not the building blocks. They're the phases. Wood turns into fire, which turns into earth. So the same thing with the I Ching, which is the book of changes, and I think it's the oldest philosophy book in the world. Yeah. It's this idea of things are always changing. Like in the I Ching, the hexagrams, the lines are constantly changing. And so there's this underlying philosophy, unlike in Western, occult traditions, mystical traditions, which are very much, I feel like in the West, there's a strong emphasis on this perfection of God, this immutable, unchanging, perfect thing that is beyond space and time. Versus, I think in the East, there's also room for this idea of nothing stays the same. Everything is mutable. Everything is always changing. Things don't stay the same. So I divided my book into those 5 elements because, it's easier to learn something if you're not like sitting down reading a boring textbook, and instead like you're reading each section. And, this is coffee table book. So there's like 60 plus like illustrations, that were commissioned specifically for my writing by this great illustrator, Kring Demetrio, and subdivided within each of the phases. So if we talk about, let's say the first phase, which is wood. So within wood, within all the rest of the elements, are the 3 main phases of Western alchemy. So even though first we have the main overarching 5 divisions of the 5 phases of wuxing, then within each of those, I'm bringing in the West. I'm mixing in East and West. And so the Western alchemy, the 3 main phases, which are negrito, albedo, and rubedo. So if you're going to do any sort of magic, any sort of occult stuff, whether it's in the Western or Eastern tradition, these are the fundamental things that you need to know. If you're going to do any sort of I Ching, traditional Chinese medicine, you have to really understand the 5 phases. You've got to understand what it means to be metal. You've got to understand what it means to be wood and fire. If you're going to do Western occult traditions, then you got to understand what negrito, albedo, and rubedo, and some people pronounce them negredo, albedo, and rubedo. I like to just pronounce it the other way. And basically, negrito, it's the darkening of something. It's when you take a substance and then you burn it, you ferment it, you destroy it. Right. Okay. So back in the day, before chemistry, modern chemistry, these alchemists, you see these old pictures and it's like they have these humongous flasks, and the flasks always have fire underneath it. And they put something in there, some ingredient. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to extract the essence of that thing. And so first they got to destroy it. And so you see, usually it's a picture of like an old dude with like a beard.
Yeah.
He's sitting in front of a flask and it's burning. And that's what's happening. It's like degrading. It's negrito. And then there comes a point where it burns and then there's white ash, or it turns into like it's burnt so much that it suddenly becomes ethereal. It becomes almost like a new substance. And that's albedo or albedo.
Okay.
Like the word albino, which is white, Okay. And so this is when it becomes more ethereal. And it's released, the spirit is kind of released. And I think a lot of people in the spiritual community and New Age community, they stop there. They're just like, yay, we're out of this body. It's all disintegrated, out of this meat suit. Woohoo. But there's this third part to Western alchemy, which is, for me, my most favorite part. It's rubedo, which is like the word ruby, red. You're reintroducing the blood back in. So, your spirit, let's go back into the body. Okay. Let's reground the ethereal. So you broke apart the old body, right? And then you release the spirit, the essence. When we talk about the quintessence, that's where it comes from. Like you're getting the quintessence, the true spirit of something. And then you're re-injecting it with blood at that final stage to kind of bring it back into this world, this meat suit, whatever you want to call it. But it's the fortified, purer version of you. It doesn't mean that it's better per se, but it's taking something, purifying it, taking out all the conditioning and whatever else, taking out the impurities and then creating an even stronger version of the original. And so these alchemists back then, people think that it's the whole thing of lead to gold. That's the big thing, lead to gold, or trying to create the elixir of life. What a lot of people don't realize is that occult texts, magical texts, they were often written in symbolic code or just in gibberish. And you can take it literally to a certain point, much like the Bible. But a lot of these alchemists, what they realize is that the process of waiting, watching the disintegration, the negrito, then to see the albedo, and then to see the rubedo and all that stuff, to see all that process, what they realized was, the lead turning into gold wasn't actually a physical, literal thing. It was me, like my soul, like that entire process, me finally being like, ding, light bulb moment. Wait a second. This process is me realizing that I am rarefying my soul. I am purifying my soul. So the gold at the end wasn't literal gold, but it was them realizing that, I don't have to be just stuck in here, like that's what magic is ultimately in all traditions. It's a way to work with invisible forces to have agency over your life so you don't feel as stuck, So alchemy is like that, whether it's Chinese alchemy, Western alchemy. So that's how I divide it. I'm like trying to circle back, like, what was I talking about?
That's okay.
It was me dividing it up into that. And each section, it has this feeling of, I'm trying to get to the essence of what wood feels like, and then what does wood negrito feel like? What does wood albedo feel like? What does, so the topics that I discuss within each of those sections is a little bit different. And, for wood, I talk a lot about ancestral stuff.
Okay.
And usually by the time I get to rubedo or rubido, I'm talking about the future because you've injected the blood back into the subject, So usually when I talk about in each of those phases, the Chinese phases, when I talk about negredo, I'm talking about the burning or the disintegration of something, which is, kind of in a way taking apart your past because you're trying to get to the flash of insight, the white of albedo or albedo, which is kind of like the present moment. And then when you're re-injecting the blood back into the beautiful Frankenstein, that is to me like, again, the 5, 10, 20 years into the future. And so based upon which phase of the wuxing we're at, I talk about different topics. For wood, it's talking about ancestors mainly. For fire, we're talking about ritual. And again, I didn't just pull these out of my ass, I'm talking about wood as the ancestors because the sort of the essence of wood, it feels like ancestors. Fire, it feels like ritual. It's passion, it's theatrics. Earth is harvest, so it's talking about food and offerings when you do rituals. When we talk about metal, it's the only element that has like the will of man, the person that kind of manipulating it. And so I really talk about technology and divination as algorithm, like tarot cards and astrology and how that actually is a tool to hack the system. And then when we finally get to water has a feeling in the phases, the wuxing as a realm of mysticism. It's like wintertime. It's like going deep. So it's me talking about dreams. It's talking about the truly mystical stuff like that. Wow. So again, each part is subdivided into the 3 Western alchemical phases as well. So that was the basic structure of the book.
Wow, that's gorgeous. That's just like so.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, it's just, definitely want this book. It's just like hitting all, because I didn't realize I've seen the terms negredo and albedo and rubiero, but I've never gone into it. And I feel like that was a big missing piece for me. And like, as I heard you describe that, like I can just imagine my own journey through healing, right? Like just, you have to go down in the depths. You got to see your therapist. You got to dig in there and you just gotta face this, face my past, face the shit. And then a flash of insight, oh, this is why I felt this or whatever. And then that with that information or insight or healing or whatever, my future is going to look different. I'm still in this body, but I'm different. Because of that that's how I kind of am imagining what the alchemists were really exploring in a sense.
I would say probably the alchemists, it was such an individual path, but I think in general, they could see, the general symbolisms of what it means when you disintegrate, what it means when, you suddenly become ethereal and it turns into white ash, and what it means to re-inject the blood or the essence back into the ethereal.
And I love that you said, to have agency over your life. Like this is this is, I mean, ultimately, yeah, all of it, the search for it. I mean, I would hope, I know for me that the reason why I do this stuff, or my own version of alchemy, my own version of everything, maybe I'm doing chaos magic, I don't know. But, it's to have agency, to live a soul expressed life. Right. And this is what this podcast is about. So it's super interesting to hear. As I hear you speaking, it sounds a lot like it's just a new language, not a new language. It's an old language, but it's another kind of language to communicate how to live your life for yourself. Right.
Right. That's the reason why I start off when we talk about wood with your ancestors, because our body, there's a strong theme of body, and the sort of like the world that we actually live in versus the fantasy or the escape. So starting with ancestors, because that's actually the foundation of most societies besides secular America, North America, secular Europe. Most societies in the world have strong ties to, bloodline, and kind of knowing where you come from and venerating. I mean, you're in Korea right now, that there's 2 holidays in Korea where the whole country shuts down.
Yeah.
Seollal and Chuseok.
Yeah. And then the ancestral rituals we do on the day of their death, the Jesa. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, unfortunately, I think a lot of young or the more recent generations of Koreans they don't do it as much, the sort of, there's also this longing, I think, recent longing that a lot of young Koreans have to reconnect with their past. And so this isn't just like, everywhere else in the world is already tight with their ancestors and it's just Americans or Canadians who don't get it. It's becoming a worldwide phenomenon of modernity and disconnection from, your village, your tribe, your whatever, your bloodline. And it's saying like, it's important to know where you come from, even if you decide I'm not really vibing with them. It's sort of like, epigenetics is a thing. Science even says it's a thing. Your environment determines what sort of genetic expressions come out of your DNA.
Yeah.
So, it's a way to also own it. And to, once you reclaim, I think, both the good and the bad of your ancestral lineage, and also kind of have a solid sense in the roots, like wood, has roots, like deep roots. Once you've got that going on, then the next steps in magic, they feel a lot more graceful, because I think a lot of people today, they're trying out so many different things and they feel very ungrounded. I talk about, my travels in Bali and in Southeast Asia and seeing just lots of ungrounded spiritual seekers.
Yeah.
And there's this constant sort of like flitting to exotic places and wanting to experience exotic things, because maybe then there'll be answers, and this is just what it means for a lot of people, I think, in the West to try to escape, and you can never escape your body, until you die.
Yeah.
And you don't want to. Your body is literally a portable ritual space for your ancestors. People are saying, I don't have the right incense. I don't have the right this and that for whatever god, goddess I'm going to try to give offerings to. And I'm like, you have an altar already. You're walking around with it 24/7. It's the altar to your ancestors who died, starved, sacrificed in order to continue the bloodline that you get to enjoy today. And so working with ancestors is a very grounding experience. And I think that once you work with ancestors, and there's a technique, I've asked, I've been very fortunate that for the past 4 or 5 years, I've had a YouTube channel called Witches in Wine, where I've interviewed some of the most like expert English speaking magic practitioners. And so in my book, I actually have some of my past guests and maybe people I haven't had on my channel yet, but who are experts in their field, come in and talk about and give tips on. So it's not just me, of course I'm talking about my experience, but I'm also bringing in a lot of people that I respect and admire. And so this book is also a way for people to, find teachers that they vibe with. Maybe for, like I'm sort of like, I see myself as sort of like the arrow that points to people, other people. I'm a curator. And so I'm pointing to, for example, Benabel Wen, who wrote Holistic Tarot. If you want to go real deep into tarot, great resource. Like if you're sort of overwhelmed with how do I learn more about tarot, go look at Benabel's stuff. And because Benabel has contributed to my book, and not just Benabel, but like Jason Miller, Aidan Wachter, Jack Grail, and so many others. These are just people that I'm thinking off the top of my head. You can look at their work as well. So it's me also being a curator of, I think, some of the best Western occult voices and Western magic voices today.
Okay. Wow. So exciting. So much to learn. That's wonderful. I love, and I have, I learned about you, and we kind of mentioned it earlier, through Rachel Capruso from Aeolin Heart. And she pointed me to you, and you pointed me to learn more about crypto, because it was during Mercury season or Gemini. I can't remember when it was. Gemini season last year. You were talking you were talking about that. You were doing a session on that type of technology. I know that you've talked to a lot of people about that, and that you pointed me to Bal Cudman, and I've been following him a little bit. I know he's not in your book, but yeah, like.
He is in my book.
Oh, is he? Oh, okay. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, Rachel's in my book. Her husband Andre's in the book.
Okay.
So for those who may not know, so last year, during the Mercury retrograde in Gemini, this was like a special Mercury retrograde that only comes around like every 16 years or so. Ideal condition to do crypto, like blockchain magic. A lot of people are scared to do magic around technology around Mercury retrograde, but it's more like, it's not a set in stone thing, depending on the type of Mercury retrograde and what phase of the Mercury retrograde, because it turns out that this Negredo, Albedo, Rubido, that stuff, that also applies to retrogrades. So this is the reason why you need to learn about these fundamental things so you can apply it to all aspects: tarot, astrology, just magic. And I really recommend Gary Caton's book, Hermetica Triptycha, which is where I was magically inspired after reading that book, which is something that Andre Berg, Rachel's husband, recommended. And then I heard Bal Cudman, who is this incredible scholar of Mesopotamian magic, Hebrew, Kabbalah, all that stuff, and occult stuff that deals with that grimoire stuff too. He is also a Wall Street trader. And you'd be surprised how many of these finance guys are occultists.
Makes sense.
He's not the only one. He's not the only one that I know.
Yeah.
And he was telling me that you can actually put in a note in an Ethereum or ETH transaction. And, a girl in China who unfortunately was being sexually harassed, nobody believed her. She wrote a plea for help on the blockchain. It's immutable. No one can change it. And it was just her SOS out into the world, her way of saying, don't gaslight me, right? Like, I know what I know, and I'm going to put it on the blockchain to really make sure that no one can change the story. Wow. And hearing that story, I was putting two and together, and I was like, being able to put in a unchangeable, which is what immutable means, an unchangeable note on the blockchain, and to do it during Mercury retrograde, that sounds like a perfect time to do a blockchain ritual. And so I think explaining blockchains would be a little bit too much right now, but to me, blockchain, Web3, crypto, all that stuff, NFTs are inherently magical. I go into more of why I think that in my book, in the metal section. But to me, inherently magical, a lot of it is me being like, again, people think that if you're into magic and you're a witch, that you need to be all about nature, and you need to reject modern life in a lot of ways because it's unnatural. And it's too, I don't even know how a lot of people would describe it, but I would say that there's this feeling that like nature is feminine and technology is masculine. And so we need to reject patriarchy by rejecting anything that's like vaguely masculine like that. And then it's me being like, actually, so much of blockchain technology is very feminine. It's decentralized. It's about relationships between what are called nodes, interconnected. There's trustless trust based upon that. So it's me being like, actually, maybe we can see that the medium has upgraded, but the first principles and the fundamentals of magic have not. And if you're doing money magic, if you're doing any sort of magic where you don't want it to change, like you want it symbolically to be like, it's set in stone. Like blockchain is more than just set in stone. There's a saying in the crypto community that even if you had gold coins from the Roman days, sooner or later, the gold is going to chip away. It's going to lose its luster. It's not, even though it's very durable, stone is very durable. That's why a lot of like old artifacts that still survive today, they're etched in stone, but they're not as durable as digital. The blockchain, you could put it on a little thumb drive and you could, shoot it off into space and it'll survive way more and longer than any material like that our ancestors used. But again, it's this idea of how do you utilize what's around you? Again, blockchain technology, thumb drives, like the whatever USB drives, they didn't come from aliens. They came from us, who are from nature, created by things made on Earth. So how do we upgrade the medium, but keep the first principles? And what happens if we decide that we're going to do rituals on the blockchain, or we're going to do rituals in virtual reality or in augmented reality? What happens when augmented reality and virtual reality, right now, the technology is not completely there, but computing power is always improving. What happens when there comes a time where you can't distinguish like away from keyboard reality from the Oculus glass that you put on, like the headset that you put on?
Right.
What happens then? And if we're talking about magic in virtual reality and augmented reality, and I believe that much of that innovation is going to happen on the blockchain, simply because the blockchain world is just ideally a great match for all of that sort of stuff going on. Wow. If that's going to happen, if we're going to have that in the future, then it's absolutely stunning, the implications for magic. Again, first principles. In my book, we're talking about the first principles of magic so that when we have a future where AR and VR is a thing, where, crypto is completely mainstream. By the way, it is already quite mainstream. Nikki Tutorials, who's like a beauty YouTuber who I love, 3 months ago was giving away $25,000 in Bitcoin, with a Cash App, like doing a partnership collab with Cash App to give away $25,000 in Bitcoin. Crypto's not going anywhere.
Right.
So when we talk about a future that is going to be very different from now, if we know the first principles of magic, it doesn't matter how the future changes because you can always apply that. Again, engineers who learn first principles can build a bridge anywhere, on the moon, in Antarctica, probably like any place that somewhat mirrors like above ground conditions. And maybe they can even like figure out how to build like amazing bridges like in completely different places as well. So that's what the book is talking about. First principles in crypto and blockchain and the metaverse and all that is simply the medium changing, as all things do in nature.
Wow. That's so, do you give like techniques or just examples of how magic is?
Mainly examples, but I do reference the ritual that Alien Heart, myself, did. And it was the first, and people can, if you guys know how to like check the blockchain, I mean, I can give the hash,
Yeah, I remember I was there.
It's like on the blockchain, like anybody can see it. It's transparent, it's immutable, it's just boom, it's there and it's there forever. So talking about the ritual and then showing that as an example of all the things you can do on blockchain.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. Oh, there's so many possibilities. It's so exciting. It's fun. It's not like, to me, like, it just sounds fun. Like to not have this, right? Like to not have this, because when you were describing, paganism and the desire for perfect beauty and nature. And so it seems so like full of fear and full of like bypassing and just like always fighting against what is, right. And it's tiring. That's tiring.
It is tiring. And I think as people who have bodies who are constantly being objectified and judged and prodded by other things and stuff. I think it's especially important for us to be able to extend that courtesy and the desiring of an imperfect world and imperfect nature and imperfect whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And part of my book talks about shadow work, which is to embrace the parts that, like society has taught us to reject. Maybe their sexual urges, or maybe it has to do with their physical urges, whatever it is. And I always describe the shadow as not a bad thing. Society tells us it's bad, but it's not bad. It's more like there are parts of us where it's almost like we're a hotel and we think we're a 5-story hotel. And so when we get the electric bill, we're just like, why is my electricity bill so fucking high? I'm a 5-story hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And then it actually turns out once you do shadow work that, oh, wait a second, I'm not just 5 stories, I'm 20 stories, but I never knew the other stories because the elevator never stopped at those floors. I ignored whatever. So it's more like the hotel is you and you already have 20 stories, but you just think that you only know 5. But if you do the shadow work, it's a lifelong process of integrating and bringing in the other 15 stories and being like, oh yeah, that's why my electricity bill is so high. Yeah. It's neither a, yay, this is all going to be so great and puppies and rainbows. It's not that. It's just accepting reality as what it is and just being like, yeah, these are all parts of me. And some of these floors are going to be nasty. Some of them are going to be dilapidated. Some of them might be amazing, but it doesn't matter because they're all a part of this hotel. And that hotel is me. So it doesn't matter if they're gross or not, if the floors are awesome or not, if I don't want the floors. They're just a part of me. So, well, might as well accept it. Yeah. And so the accepting of the shadow is a huge part of what I personally believe makes magic work. Like a lot of people, they say magic's not real because I try to do a spell and it didn't work. I try to do a money magic. I try to do love magic, whatever it is, and it didn't come true. So it must be fake. The thing is that I would invite people to first do shadow work because a lot of times we say we want something, but because we haven't reclaimed all the different floors, what we're doing magic for is not exactly what we think we're doing magic for. Once you reclaim more and more of yourself through your shadow work, you'd be surprised how on point the magic becomes. Because once you know, like, yeah, I have 15 other floors and they're all dilapidated, then you can do magic that takes into account all those things, rather than just doing magic, ignoring the reality of how you actually are. So shadow work is, I think I talk about it in the wood section. It's like somewhere in the beginning. Ancestral work and shadow work is like very much a part of the beginning, which is, again, first principles. Know where you come from, know your epigenetics, know your genetics, your DNA, and do your shadow work. And then we can start talking about the magic. And then we can start talking about ritual. Then we can start talking about tarot and astrology and doing like all that sort of like, like fun stuff once we've got the foundations down.
Okay. Yeah. I love that. Foundational. You can't build anything if you don't have a foundation. It's so basic. Yeah. I love that you're laying it out. So good. So good. Okay. Well, I feel like we've talked about this, but just as the last question, just in case that you have more to say, because I'd love to hear, but yeah, how does your work? So, I was going to say, occultism or chaos magic, whatever way you want to define it, relate to living a soul expressed life? I mean, it feels pretty obvious, but how would you say, how would it help? How does this, maybe your book, maybe anything, how does it help you live a soul expressed life, or us?
I would say that, okay, as an atheist, yes, you can be a witch and occultist, whatever, and you can still be a flagrant atheist like myself. To me, the concept of soul is probably different than a lot of other spiritual people. To me, there is something about being in this body and being a completely unique, differentiated person. I'm not like you, you're not like me. And society tries to give us some sort of, tries to hammer us into sort of like certain shapes and stuff. And for me to just be like, nope, you know? So, and to try to decondition that and stuff. So to me, the soul is the ultimate differentiatedness of each person, which necessarily means that everybody's path is different. You know, we can all be going towards the same star, but the way that we're going towards it might be different. You know, some people may be going to a completely different star than me, and that's totally fine. So to live a soul express life, I'm a huge proponent of this system called human design. So I love astrology. I love human design. I love tarot. I love, you know, grimoires. I love everything that's mystical. But I like them because it helps me figure out me, not you, and trying to be like you and vice versa, but me as a completely unique person. To me, a soul is like a snowflake, you know, very unique. And the more we lean into accept and surrender to the fact that we're so different, and probably society's very narrow definitions are not going to jive with us, and to learn how to surrender and let go of the shame. You know, I love Brené Brown's work. So the shame that comes with not fulfilling what society wants you, what your parents want you to be. This is a lifelong process, but that process is lovely, to just constantly feel like you're shedding another sort of layer, you're another conditioning, you're letting it go, you know, you're just tossing it. And each time you're doing it, you're actually becoming more and more of a witch, because to me, we are all born as witches. We're born magical. It's a birthright. So for us to not be magical is unnatural, because if we were just left to be, we would just, you know, there is no separation in I think a person who is just never was conditioned. There is no difference between art, culture, magic, science, all these things. You know, they're all a holistic part. But it's going to look different for each person because, again, we're differentiated. So to live a fully soulful expression, to me, magic is an incredible tool with all these other tools to decondition. Deconditioning is to become truly your differentiated, unique self, but it's just a tool. And for me to say magic is the only way is false. To make my entire personality revolve around magic, I'm just like, I wouldn't make it revolve around a hammer, you know, because what I'm interested in it, I'm interested in building a house. So magic is the hammer. This other thing can be the screwdriver. This other thing can be a laser cut, whatever it is. But I think magic is very useful for those who've reached a certain level where they're like, okay, I'm willing to work with the numinous, the liminal, maybe the invisible, things that aren't just, I would say, more mainstream, more quote unquote obvious. So living a soulful life for me, and I hope for everybody else, is to strip away the conditioning and get to your birthright as a Homo sapien, as a citizen of Earth, because animals are naturally magical. And we are 100% entitled to that as well.
Love it. Thank you so much. That's so good. I just love the essence of who we are, how we came, and how we are here. That's who we're meant to be, and how we express ourselves. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on today and speaking to everyone. How can we be in touch with you? I'll have the links in the show notes, but just where's your favorite place to be found?
Probably on every social media, but like I'm probably most active, like currently I'm most active on Twitter, but before it was on TikTok. It's just my first and last name, Chaweon Koo. My YouTube is Witches and Wine. All my social media stuff is there. I'm like really bad with all that organized stuff, but it's like my name is unique. So if you Google, I'll probably be the first result.
Okay, awesome. And your book, we can find it anywhere. We can find it on Amazon, everywhere. Okay.
Yes. So it's you probably want to look it up with my name. So again, I love having a unique name because it's, you know, I'm the only Chaweon Koo like on Amazon. So yeah.
Okay. So Chaweon Koo, Spellbound. Yes. Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And absolutely, I was considering asking you to come to talk about human design too. You just mentioned it, but I don't know if that's something that you talk about much. And I know you talked about it a little bit before in your social media.
I don't really talk about it as much.
Okay.
So yeah, but I highly recommend that people not look at pop human design.
Okay.
There's actual like legit deep human design stuff. Go to source material. Always, always, always go to source material. You can put your personal gnosis on top of it after you learn source material. But I'm telling people right now, 80-90% of what you see online is pop human design. It is not source material human design.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's the clip I wanted. No. All right. So thank you so much, Chaweon. And I send you so much love and all the best with your book.
You.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to this powerful conversation between Chaweon and I. Remember, to get in touch with Chaweon, find all her links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, make sure to subscribe to Josette's Soul Salon and leave a review.